those I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Mike Moe. On behalf of my colleagues from GSV and our partners at Arizona State University, I want to welcome you to our 9th Annual Education and Talent Innovation Summit. And how about one more applause for President Bush? He was just off the charts. So over the next 3 days, we've got 4,000 people that are going to be here. We have 450 education and talent companies presenting. We have 900 presenters. Our mission is to accelerate innovation in education innovation to optimize impact. Our vision is to ensure that everybody has equal opportunity to participate in the future. And our passion is we believe that while talent is equally distributed around the world, opportunity is not. So really the challenge, and please feel free to eat, you can click the glasses, but I'm fine. I promise you I'll be so engaging you'll quit eating short enough. No, I'm kidding. But the challenge to our passion is articulated by Thomas Piketty, the economist, who in 2013 wrote the book Capital. And I'll save you reading 700 pages. Basically, capital boils down to this equation, which is R is greater than G. Effectively, what R is the rate of return on capital is greater than the economic growth. So in other words, what this means is the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. There's 2,043 billionaires in the world. If you look at the 8 richest people, they are as wealthy as the bottom half of the world's population. 3 billion people in the world today live on $2.50 or less. 22,000 people die every single day from starvation. 2,000 people die every single day because of lack of clean water. About a quarter of the globe's population doesn't even have access to electricity. So we all know there's a direct correlation between level of education and income, but to participate in the future, you actually have to get to the future, and it's tough to be focused on food for thought when you're focused on what you're going to have to eat that night. Also, we know in America, if you come from a bottom quartile household and family, you have only an 8% probability of graduating from any college. For a country, every grade of college advancement equals 17% growth in GDP. And there's also a direct correlation between GDP per capita, which effectively is your quality of life, with the level of college attainment. So if we're going to do anything about R is greater than G, the only way that we can do it is by emphasizing education to trounce capital. So investors are very bullish on the education talent sector. That's really good news. Look at the performance of different companies. Chegg was up 141% last year, 2 million subscribers. Tal Education Group also was up 141%, is now the largest education company in the world with a $20 billion market cap. 2U was up 118%. American Public University was up 96%. New Oriental was up 94%. Instructure was up 91%. Rosetta Stone was up 84%, and Workday was up 60% last year. Really incredible. Also last year, we had 7 Chinese IPOs, performed well, up on average 56%. CB Insights, looking at different sectors, has education and talent ranked the second highest in terms of likely IPO candidates. And we already have 7 now education and talent unicorns. We also have at the conference, at least today, Cindy Mee, who's the first female CEO of an education unicorn. Cindy, to show kind of her hustle, she came here yesterday to be here today, and she's flying back to China, I think, tonight. So venture capitalists invested $4 billion in education and talent companies in 2017. That's a 6x increase from when we started the summit in 2010. And the reason why investors and venture capitalists are excited about the sector is, one, the problem opportunity that exists. That's a classic investment opportunity. But also you're seeing companies that are rapidly scaling their businesses in ways that are unprecedented. So they're what I call weapons of mass instruction. Examples of this weapons of mass destruction include Coursera with 31 million students. Udacity, you can out-cheer, that's good. Udacity with 8 million students. You have Shutong, which is out of Tsinghua with 10 million students. Course Hero, 10 million students. Class Dojos in 180 countries. Clever is in 60,000 schools. Remind has 27 monthly active users. And Udemy has 65,000 classes. So entrepreneurs are exploring different ways to create greater access, lower cost, improve the results. And so this formula is not a new formula. In fact, go look at the great explorer and entrepreneur Christopher Columbus. He had this idea of a faster route from Europe to Asia. So he was going to go west. And so he took this idea first to King John of Portugal in 1485. King John thought this was an interesting idea. He took it to his investment committee. They said, too much time, too much money. They took a pass. He went down the road to see Queen Isabella in Spain. She brought it to her advisors. She couldn't get her head around the idea. Sorry. As a great entrepreneur would do, he went back. Columbus went back to King John of Portugal to pitch the idea once again, but as luck would have it, somebody, Bartholomew Diaz, had gone around the Cape of Good Hope and found a faster route, and so basically Columbus lost his first mover advantage. So then he went to the family offices in Genoa in 1488 and Venice in 1488, but the dumb money wanted to know why the smart money had passed. So now what he has to do, he goes and hires an investment banker who happens to be his brother Bartholomew. And so Bartholomew goes up to England, sees King Henry VII, also sees King Charles the VIII, but both of them are highly skeptical. They're saying, why do you got to come all the way up here if this is such a great idea? And oh, by the way, hire an investment banker, you must really be desperate for money. So anyway, going back, what happens is King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella see this hustle by Columbus. They like this guy. So they bring him in-house, first entrepreneur in residence for 3 years, and they're baking this idea, but finally they give up. They say, this isn't going to work. They send him out of town, as legend has it, on a donkey, but then summon him back, cut a deal. So Columbus gets 10% of all revenue for new lands into perpetuity, basically carried interest. So the original plan looked like this. He was going to go from Europe to Asia. What actually happened, of course, is he discovered America. So one of the great pivots of all time. And that's how Columbus became famous. So as the great philosopher Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And that's what entrepreneurs do. So as we look at that in the context of the times we're in, times are changing, and they're changing faster than ever. So it's always been hard to predict the future, like predicting the weather, but if you focus on things that you do know, the sun comes up in the east, fall follows summer, that gets you a little bit more accuracy to this forecast. But we like what George Carlin said about how you do it. Weather forecast for tonight, dark. You know that. Any event, so one of the issues with predicting the future and the way that historically people did it, they basically extrapolated the past into the future. And when we were in linear times, that worked pretty well. And so going back to our friend Columbus, when he had the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria in 1492, that's what the ships looked like, and he navigated by looking at the stars. If he went back 500 years, things weren't much different. It'd be basically the same kind of ships, and they navigated by looking at the stars. But if you put him 500 years ahead, it would be very difficult for him to even conceptualize the fact that we're now sending rocket ships into space and having an electric car ride with it as a PR event. So basically, Columbus's mind would basically explode, right? It couldn't conceptualize how this even could happen. So if you kind of look at this from 500 years, how much happened the 500 years before Columbus, you think about the 500 years after Columbus, it's incredible. In these exponential times that we're in, what we know is the future isn't what it used to be. And so for an example of looking, kind of using imagination to think what about exponential future looks like, meet the Jetsons.
Meet George Jetson. His boy Elroy
So what's amazing about the Jetsons was this was created in 1962, 55 years ago. Imagine a society 100 years later in 2062. Yet a lot of what they had predicted actually came true. From drones and autonomous cars, to hyperloops, to smart watches, to FaceTime, even 3D printed food, and robot assistants. I mean, all these were predicted in the Jetsons. Well, the one thing that they couldn't even reconceive was that what a school was going to look like. It basically looked like a school looks like today. In fact, you could have taken Elroy and put him back into the Flintstones, and it wouldn't have made any difference. And that's just interesting about what the kind of the reality of that. It's hard to imagine how that could be different. So when we talk about the future of the future, it's exponential, and it's about change and change happening quickly. So when you look at disruptive technology and how fast it reached 50 million people after it was commercialized, this just shows you how things are happening at speeds that you can't even comprehend. So airlines, it took 68 years to reach 50 million people. Telephone, 50 years. Electricity, 46 years. Computers, 14 years. Cell phones, 12 years. The internet, it took 7 years to reach 50 million people. Facebook, it took 3 years. Twitter, it took 2 years. And Pokemon Go, it took 19 days. Reached 500 million people in 60 days. So the activity that has created this acceleration of change in exponential times is what I call the Big Bang, where the four forces coming together that are changing things at this incredible rate. And those four forces are Moore's Law, the fall of the wall, internet, and Human Genome Project. So when you look at the first Big Bang, Moore's Law, so Gordon Moore, just over 50 years ago, postulated that computing power was going to double every couple of years. And in fact, that's exactly what's happened. And what that's resulted in is the iPhone 10 that came out last fall is 1,000 times more powerful than the computer that landed people on the moon in 1969. And so if you think about Moore's Law over the next 7 years, just 7 years, what that's going to mean is computing power is going to be more powerful than the brain. You're going to be able to create sensors to let blind people see. And the phone in your pocket is going to be as powerful as an IBM Watson today. Sorry, Mike King, wherever you are. Big Bang number 2, the fall of the wall. What the fall of the wall did was unleash globalization, democracy, and capitalism in ways you can't even imagine. So in 1989, the wall came down in Berlin. Democracy today is 56% of the world's population. And when you look at the S&P 500 in 1990, 15% of the S&P 500's revenue came from outside the United States. Today it's 43%. The rise of the middle class is incredible. It's gone from 1 billion people in the middle class around the world in 1990. Today it's 3.2 billion. And by 2050, it's going to be 5.2 billion people. Look at airline travel. In 1990, 1 billion people flew on airplanes. It's quadrupled today, and it's going to double to 8 billion by 2036. Dubai International Airport has become the busiest airport in the world. 90 million passengers every single year. Dubai International in 1990 had 5 million passengers. So the connectivity of talent and capital and ideas is coming to cities. When you look at the growth of urbanization, you've gone from 13% of people living in cities in 1900, 56% live in cities today, and by 2050, 70% of all people are going to live in cities. And the great cities around the world are going to get bigger, and they're going to get greater. So look at Manila. It's expected Manila by 2100 is going to have 40 million people. That's the size of California. Mumbai is expected to have 83 million people. In Lagos, Nigeria, 88 million people by 2100. These economic spheres of power that are being created are also incredibly important. So China's One Belt, One Road, with linking China to Asia, to Africa, to the Middle East, and part of Europe, has 65% of the world's population, part of it, 31% of GDP. Another economic influence that we see as a huge trend is what we call One America, effectively linking between Canada all the way down to Chile. That's about 15% of the globe's population. It also is 31% of global GDP. In fact, we're such a believer in the One America concept that we've created a strategic partnership and investment from HMC, a Latin America asset management firm with about $9 billion of assets, and my friends in the front row, they're very happy to have you here. But we're very excited about where this is evolving, in the decades ahead. Third big bang, the internet. So in 1994, Netscape commercialized the internet. So the digital tracks have been laid over the last 24 years, now connect 3.8 billion people around the globe. Looking at the digital disruption that's occurred, it's unbelievable. So if you look at the 5 largest market cap companies in the world 50 years ago, it was IBM, AT&T, General Motors, Standard Oil, and Kodak. Amazing that 2 of those 5 companies during the next 50 years actually went bankrupt. And you look at the 5 largest market cap companies in the world today, it's Apple, it's Alphabet, it's Microsoft, it's Amazon, and it's Tencent. And when you look at the 7th and 8th largest market cap companies, it's Alibaba and Facebook. So when you look at Tencent, Alibaba, and Facebook, these companies didn't exist 20 years ago. 4.8 billion people around the world have a mobile phone. For context, just 4.2 billion people have a toothbrush. So maybe somebody will create an app for that or something. Anyway, everything has become smart. From a smartphone to a smart watch to smart cities, even smart water. Communication cost is plummeting. So a 10-minute long-distance international call in 1990 cost $15. Today, it's obviously free through WhatsApp and Skype. Take a close look at this picture. This is St. Peter's Square in 2005. Everybody looking closely? Here's what it looks like today. So this incredible explosion of digital photography has taken place, enabled by the internet and by mobile phones. What's amazing about this is that Kodak, which was founded in 1888 and actually had the patent for digital photography, went bankrupt in 2011, which is the same year that Instagram was sold to Facebook for $1 billion when it had 13 people, and the same year that Snapchat was founded. Today has a $20 billion market cap. So Larry Page, founder of Google, said lots of companies don't succeed over time. What do they fundamentally get wrong? They usually miss the future. So as you think about the future, it's a pretty critical thing for everybody in this room. So the fourth big bang is the Human Genome Project. Completed in 2003, from 1990 to 2010, had a nearly $1 trillion economic impact. What the Human Genome Project now has enabled is 5,000, if I can get this to work, genetic diseases can be diagnosed. There's 132 personalized medicines now available from the Human Genome Project being completed. And 23andMe allows you to get your own personal genomic map for $199. The impact to health and what that means for longevity of people is significant. So in 1900, there was just 1.6 billion people around the globe. Today, it's 7.4 billion. By 2050, it's 9.7 billion. People are obviously living much longer. A male was expected to live to be 31 years old in 1900. It's now 72 years. And it's going to be 85 years by 2050. 2 out of every 3 babies born today are going to live to be 100 years or older. And what a baby used to play with were these physical Legos blocks. What they're now learning to play with is a digital iPad. So imagining what this exponential future looks like, what this digital future looks like, is critical to understand where opportunities and problems are going to be created. So you just think about the fact, in a really short period of time, the largest media company in the world doesn't own any of its own content. That's Facebook. The largest lodging company in the world doesn't have any of their own rooms. That's Airbnb. The largest music company in the world doesn't produce any of its own music. That's Spotify. The largest storage company in the world doesn't have any warehouses. That's Dropouts. The largest transportation company in the world doesn't own any of their own cars. That's Didi. And so what did they do? They imagined what a different future looked like with the circumstances that exist today and are going to exist tomorrow. So they were able to look at this ridiculous concept of how people used to get cars. standing out in the street corner, almost getting hit, waving your arm, having a cab driving around like a fisherman looking for fish. I mean, it's crazy, right? But the classroom today looks like this still, right? You know, who knows what's going on, and you know, raise your hand, one person gets called on. Doesn't make any sense. Why is that the way things are done? And so a story I like to give as an example, the Smith family got together every Thanksgiving, and one of the highlights of Thanksgiving for them was this great ham that they all celebrated with. And one of the features of the ham is the end was cut off. And so after one Thanksgiving, they were sitting around after a couple glasses of wine, they're all talking, and they're kind of saying, well, you know, why did they cut the end of the ham off? What's sort of the secret to that? So finally, they want to know what happened. They track down, you know, Grandma Smith. They say, Grandma Smith, you know, why do we cut off the end of the ham? And she goes, when we first got married, when we made the ham, our oven was only this big, so we had to cut off the end of the ham, so it would fit in the oven. And people liked it so well, we just kept on doing it. Well, that's kind of the way a lot of things happen, right? So Bertrand Russell said most people would rather die than think, and many of them do. And it's true. So why do we pay $250,000 for a college degree when a lot of what you learn is going to be obsolete in 10 years? Why is the admission director at Harvard, in fact, effectively the hiring director at Google? Why does there Chinese walls exist between work and education? Why do we have to teach them? That doesn't, you know, why can't we use technology to change that dynamic? How come students advance by a calendar versus competency? Why do you have to go to college and take all your classes from one university? Why can't you take classes in subjects from the best professors, wherever they might be? Why is it conventional wisdom that learning shouldn't be fun? Why do we have an A, B, C, D, F grading system? And here's my real question. What happened to E? You know what the answer is? E dropped out. Sorry, that's not funny. But when we're talking about graduation rates, so that's pretty good, right? I mean, we did that on the fly. Anyway, so we talk about graduation rates, and we're celebrating the fact that 83% of high school students are now graduating the highest ever. But you know, if we want to ensure that everybody has an equal opportunity to participate in the future, you know, is that acceptable? Is that acceptable that 17% are even going to graduate from high school? So if you looked at the airline industry, if they had as their goal that 83% of the flights would land at their destination safely, there wouldn't be an airline industry, right? So Albert Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. And what we got to do is use imagination to think how people are going to obtain knowledge. So when you think about the fact that we're in a global marketplace, a knowledge-based economy, what you know, your education, your skills makes the difference not only for a company, for an individual, but for a company, and for that matter, a country. So as we think about the future, the exponential future that we're in, for individuals, we know that 50% of all jobs that currently exist are at risk of being replaced in the next 20 years. But we also know that there's a direct correlation between your level of education and the likelihood that your job will be made obsolete by technology. So no longer are you going to be able to fill up your knowledge tank to age 25 and drive off through life. You're going to continually need to replenish it for your entire life. Lifelong learning, Kaizen. You know, the old system, you played from 0 to 5, you learned from 5 to 25, you had a job from 25 to 65, and at 65 you retired. The new system is you're going to learn from the time you're born until the time you retire, if you ever retire. And we call that Kaizen EDU, or continuous learning, or lifelong learning, which is just a fundamental of the world that we're in. We also know in the old world, a person coming out would have one job at one company, basically one career. Department of Labor says that same person coming out of college today is going to have 15 jobs. When we look at millennials, 82% want to be flexible workers or part of this whole gig economy. Already in China, 60% of all workers are flexible. United States is 40% are flexible. So college is going to be critical, but how people get this knowledge they need to participate in the future is going to be different. So in 1900, in the entire world, there was just 500,000 university students. Today, there's 207 million students around the world. And by 2030, that's going to double. But that incremental 200 million people get into college education, they're not going to get it the way that the previous people got it. They're not going to, most of them aren't going to have to drive to campus. They don't care about the dormitory. They don't care about the football team. They don't care about the marching band. What they care about is getting the education they need, the knowledge they need to be effective and to take care of themselves. You look at what's one of these type of opportunities. Back to my friends at Shutong, which is part of Tsinghua, they believe they're going to have 100 million students by 2021, which is just incredible, and they're on pace to do that. We talked about Coursera earlier, 31 million students. They already offer 10 degrees with a highly disruptive pricing model. So Andrew Ng, who's the founder of Coursera and also regarded as the top AI person in the world, says AI is the new electricity. And the reason why it's the new electricity because it's invisible, it's ubiquitous, and it's going to transform everything. And so just as much as AI is going to take away jobs, we also know that it's going to be a big part of how people are going to get knowledge. So using the adaptive technology that you see with a Netflix, a Spotify, or an Amazon, combined with the diagnostic technology from an IBM Watson or a 23andMe, that gets to what I call just-for-me learning, truly personalized learning. The blockchain, we've seen what it does in the digital currency world. Basically, blockchain is going to apply to every industry, the new computing platform from real estate to healthcare and, yes, education. We believe augmenting the old knowledge currency, the degree, with this knowledge as a currency, different ways that you're representing the knowledge that you have validated by your peers as you build out your knowledge portfolio with different ways that you're able to show the courses that you've taken, different skills that you have, different ways that you've accumulated this knowledge. We see a gamification of everything. And so looking at the world of gaming, in 1995, there was just 100 million gamers. Today, there's 2.6 billion people who play games. Tech titans like Elon Musk said, I like video games. In fact, that's what got me into software engineering when I was a kid. Mark Zuckerberg said, I definitely wouldn't have gotten into programming if I hadn't played games. I mean, it's just amazing to see the people that use games as ways to do big things. So kids already play 10,000 hours of video games between kindergarten and 12th grade, which is the same amount of time they spend in the classroom. So this invisible learning concept, you're learning by playing and doing things you're just naturally doing, that's going to be a key concept of how people participate in the future. Social mobile, people spend over 3 hours a day on their mobile device. Many of you spent a couple hours on your mobile device in this room tonight. But that's up from 20 minutes 10 years ago. And what are they doing? Social media and games. So if we want to figure out how to reach people in a natural way, that's how we're going to do it. We're going to put education in the middle of social media. Hollywood meets Harvard is a theme that we've focused on for some time, but that's using the entertainment and engagement value that Hollywood's really good at and the consistency and marrying that with different ways that people learn. I would argue that Hamilton has taught more people about American history than schools have. And Masterclass offers this Netflix-like subscription model to be able to access experts in a variety of fields, including Serena Williams teaching tennis. The future of companies. So around the world, companies want to both aspire to have the innovation mindset that makes Silicon Valley so famous, but also our fear of being disrupted. In fact, the disruptor himself, Jeff Bezos, said, frankly, I'm more concerned about two guys in a garage than I am about kind of the traditional competition. Entrepreneurship is thriving. 72% of all high schoolers want to be an entrepreneur. There's 20 times more entrepreneurship classes offered today than in 1980, and the graduate school for entrepreneurs has become Y Combinator that has as prestigious alumni from companies like Airbnb, Dropouts, Instacart, people in this room like Clever, Class Dojo, and Terra. So we have our own graduate school that we've created at GSV called GSV Labs. We have our new CEO, Nikhil Sinha, in the room. But what we're doing at GSV Labs is putting together an ecosystem around entrepreneurship and innovation with startups, corporations, and investors At GSV Labs in Silicon Valley, we have 200 startups. $300 million was invested in those startups last year. We have 25 corporate partners, including Google, 3M, Cisco, Times of India, and so forth. And we have offices now we have offices in Silicon Valley, but also opened one in Boston, Delhi, and Bangalore with our partners, Times of India, with our goal to be in 40 innovation markets around the world over the next 5 years. Out of GSV Labs also was started Reboot, which is focused on bringing women who left the workforce typically to raise a family, come back to the workforce to get them current, connected, and confident, and major corporations from around the world are adopting the Reboot program, bringing women back into the workforce. Okay. And so while it's not a great number, that just 26 of the Fortune 500 are female CEOs, you want to see a window to the future, 60% of all college students today are female. So I think that's pretty indicative that we're going to be in a woman-run world pretty soon. And I got 2 daughters, so I'm very happy about that. So Fortune magazine comes out with their top 100 companies to work for every single year. And it really had 3 key things that the top companies did. One was a meritocracy. You were promoted and paid by what by your ability and what you did. Number 2, they invested in their employees. In fact, of these top 100 companies, on average, they spent 58 hours dedicated on training and development, which is significantly greater than the typical company. And they were mission-driven, so it's no longer about just building a great product or getting paid a lot of money. The company had to have purpose. It had to have meaning. So people at the top 100 companies to work for said they're 20 times more likely to say their company is innovative, 15% more likely to look forward to coming to work, and 11% more likely for customers to rate service as excellent. Stock performance for the Fortune 100 top companies to work for is more than double a typical company. So what does this mean? You got a happier team, you got happier customers, you got happier shareholders. So really, the top 100 companies to work for is really just the top 100 companies. Lastly, as I wrap up this talk about the future of countries. And so much of the 20th century was called the American century. And for much of the time period, it really was the American century. The fundamentals of the American century is around education, innovation, entrepreneurship, immigration, and opportunity, what I called EIEIO. And so, but that was the driver. And looking at it from an education standpoint, in 1965, high school attainment in the United States was number 1 in the world. College attainment was number 3. But really, the story of the last third of the 20th century is the Singapore story. And Singapore, which became independent in 1965, at the time had a GDP per capita approximately equal to Jamaica, another small island. And it was about 1/8 the GDP per capita as the United States. But a visionary leader, Lee Kuan Yew, who ran Singapore for 50 years, basically saw this EIEIO formula and applied it to Singapore and invested in all these things that made Singapore this just amazing country. And from an education standpoint, Singapore has become the number 1 country in the world. And at the same time, the United States has dropped to 3rd world status. And so looking at the economic impact, Singapore has now effectively caught the United States from a GDP per capita standpoint and is not looking back. So President Xi of China has taken a page out of the Singapore playbook, and in his recent 4-hour speech to the People's Congress late last year, he spent about an hour of his 4-hour talk talking about the strategic importance of education. He said, strengthening the education is fundamental to our pursuit of national excellence. Asian culture already values education significantly more than the United States culture. They spend, on average, about 7 times more than they do in the U.S. And look where our priorities are. So in 40 states, the top paid public employee in this state is a sports coach. I love sports, but something's out of whack when that's the priority, that's the reality. So James Heckman, the University of Chicago Nobel laureate, said, by age 5, it is possible to predict with depressing accuracy who will complete high school and who won't. The reason that's the case is you look at 52% of low-income kindergarten students aren't ready to come into school. And what happens to them? 25% more likely to drop out of high school. If you drop out of high school, you're 8 times more likely to go to prison. 80% of the U.S. prison population is made up of high school dropouts. Investing in human capital, you get a higher return the earlier you invest. In fact, about $1 invested in pre-K returns $7. 85% of the human brain is developed before age 5, but 98% of education spending is after 5. Doesn't make sense. China gets that. They spend nearly 3 times more than the U.S. does in early education. So to wrap up, we talked about the future of the future. We talked about exponential world that we're in. In the linear world that we were in, when you wanted to navigate around the world and see things and do things, you had to navigate around the 7 C's, right? Well, to participate in the exponential world that we're in, there's new 7 C's that we're focused on, and these are these 7 C's: critical thinking, creativity, cultural fluency, character, collaboration, civic engagement, and communication. And over the next 3 days, we'll have examples of all this. So tomorrow at noon, keynote speaker Andrew McAfee from MIT, critical thinking on the machine age that we're in. Collaboration, we just had a wonderful presentation from President Bush. He had a great collaboration with President Vincenti Fox, who will be here Wednesday evening. Communication, John Legend, not only what he does with his music, but how he uses his celebrity for advocacy. Cultural fluency, we have Chris Whittle Wednesday afternoon, great education entrepreneur, building a global network of K-12 schools. John Katzman in creativity. John, founder of Princeton Review, founder of 2U, and now the founder of Noodle, celebrating John's career on Wednesday evening. On character, Angela Duckworth from Penn, talking about grit. And then civic engagement, Matthew McConaughey on Wednesday night as well. And so going back to where we began and talking about our aspiration of everybody have equal opportunity to participate in the future and how we use these 7 C's and how we make big change happen, what I'd say, I'd like to end it with a quote from Michelangelo. And Michelangelo said, "The greater risk is not shooting for the stars and falling short, but aiming too low and hitting the target." I say we shoot for Mars and beyond. Thank you very much.